Hey everybody, I am back again with Dan Mons. The first time we talked was MAME, the second time was RetroNAS, and now we're talking about video signals and stuff. How you doing, Dan?
Good, Bob. Yourself?
Excellent. So I'm really excited to have this chat because this is your day job, right? You're in the broadcast TV movie world, right?
Yeah, definitely big chunks of my work are that stuff. I do all sorts of weird things, but there's some HPC stuff these days and supercomputing and scientific research. But yeah, like I reckon, I don't know, about 50 to 60% is still video stuff these days. Yeah, so it's pretty good, and some digital preservation stuff as well, which probably fits in a lot with what you want to talk about today, I'm guessing.
Yes, absolutely. So what I really wanted to discuss a ton of things. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but 480i for a video side of things. Not we'll touch on video games a bit, but the video side of things is definitely something I wanted to discuss. And from the point of view of how it works, and I know Chris from Displaced Gamers has that awesome video, but we could
Mm.
still talk through it a little bit. But also from an archival point of view, what's the best ways to do that? How can you archive it in a way where it could be preserved to use through other things? Because Premiere is an asshole and doesn't like to be compatible with formats. So let's just basically jump right in. 480i, right? So I'm going to give my Bob Everyman 10-foot view of what this is. So CRTs, and I'm going to also stick to North America NTSC because I'm not really smart enough to think of both at the same
That's
time.
right.
So we're
It's all
just
good.
going to stick there. But basically, you have CRTs running from the dawn of CRTs ish until late 90s, early 2000s at 15 kilohertz. And that refresh rate allows for 240 lines to be drawn at a time
Yep. Yep.
ish. So
Yep.
it's actually more than that, but visible ish.
Yep.
So what you get with video games is each one of those lines drawn 60 times per second. Once again, ish, give or take.
Yep.
Consoles are a little off. Video signals are 5994, but we're for the purpose of this until we get into that, I'm just going to say 60.
Yep.
So that's how you get that smooth progressive scan motion. And interlaced video signals, we get this fake more detail effect by drawing the even lines first, then the odd lines second. So
Yep.
one single frame cut in half,
Yep.
one single frame of 480-ish lines,
Yep.
and the even lines are drawn on frame one, and the next lines are drawn on frame two,
Yeah, so
essentially
they're
making it 30 frames per
fields.
second.
Yeah, so they're
Fields,
fields technically. Yeah, yeah. But yes,
right.
that's pretty much it. Yep.
And your persistence of vision is slow enough that those two fields are interlaced together in your brain as one 480 line single frame.
Yep.
However, your persistence of vision is fast enough to perceive a flicker.
Correct.
So even though you really wouldn't have known until the dawn of the flat panel era, because that's just how we all saw TV, we are able to see that interlacing flicker, but it's still perceived in your brain as one frame per for both fields blended together. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it is, and there's some extra stuff around that too. Like interlacing is really bad for like static content. So anything where you've got a still image is going to show up worse because you're going to get that sort of bobbing up and down effect. So where things are kind of a bit more fluid, where you've got video and motion and things like that, even when you've got like, if you think about your average sort of TV show, sitcom, whatever, there's always something moving about, people in the background or
Right.
cameras whipping back and forth. So yeah, you don't see that as bad. Where it really stands out is if you ever saw like old school presentations made on CRTs where it was like static content, and of course like video games, right? Anything where you've got like life bars or HUDs or whatever, that stuff will bob up and down pretty bad and be pretty ugly. And that's probably more of the flicker that the average person sees. Although it is definitely one of those psychological effects where you'll get people who they'll look at an interlaced image for a while and they'll tell you, oh, I've got a headache or my eyes hurt or something like that. Like it'll be that sort of comment where it's like they don't know why, but it's definitely that flickering that's sort of getting to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the context of video games, one conversation that's had a lot that I think I understand, but I'd love to hear your take on it is a 480i video game ever truly 60 frames per second? And is it that some video games draw each field that way, so you are refreshing 60 times, and some don't. So just like some video games only run at 30 frames per second anyway. So it could be either, right?
Correct. Yeah. So some will be definitely 60 frames displayed via 60 fields. So essentially you're throwing away half of every frame ish. So you're rendering the whole frame internally, and then half that frame is being thrown away because you're only drawing half the lines.
Hmm.
So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is then to have games that will render at 30 frames a second split over 60 fields. So you're drawing each one twice, and then you're getting that interlace effect. Yeah, and you'll probably feel that more. That'll be more, especially if you go back to video games that were made before any sort of like delayed rendering type stuff, where input and frames were matched up. You'll definitely feel that when it's 60 frames per second rendered and fields per second rendered versus 30. Yeah, so it really depends on a lot of things. There are some like the definitely PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2. I'm not sure about other consoles, but definitely they can even like internally their GPUs can render interlaced. And so that's why you'll see things like a good place to see the effects of that are in emulators. So DuckStation, PCSX2 will, because they're quite accurate in the way that they're drawing things internally, they'll spit out interlaced frames and they'll actually have to deinterlace them to get them to the screen, which is kind of interesting.
Hmm. So that also then explains how Mike is able to do this essentially inverse telecine on video games. Because if a 480i video game is split perfectly that way, so each of those frames are drawn twice, or each of those fields are drawn twice, so it is a true 30 frame per second. That's how Mike's able to flip that back to actually be a 30p, so then line double to 60p image, correct?
Yeah, I guess it'll depend on a lot of things, but yeah, if it's a 30 frame per second game, and like there'll be games too where the frame rate won't even hit that internally, right? So some Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1 games, you'd be lucky if they're actually rendering 10, 15 frames per second sometimes. So in
Yeah.
that case, even if you're quote unquote throwing away information or whatever, or you've got some sort of delay where you're buffering to do your deinterlacing, you won't even notice because you're probably then going to be drawing like 4 of those frames for every one actual frame of animation anyway. So it's probably not going to hurt too much. So it really depends. I
Yeah.
think it's of an era, right? Like it's of an era where 3D was pretty young and pretty terrible, and frame rates were pretty terrible. So yeah, I don't think it really depends on the game, but yeah.
Yeah. So then when it comes to deinterlacing video games, then, and I went through that in the different RetroTink videos. I showed the different examples, but it's very tough because of frame rate mismatches, just like all video games, because how is it made into 480i that, the two fields are
Mm,
just doubling
yep.
up? So that's kind of out of the scope of what we're going to talk about today anyway. So for video, the one that's easy in my brain to at least understand is the inverse telecine, which is exactly like the video games that are just drawn. Each field is doubled just like regular interlaced video. So that's the same thing. You have a 30 frame per second ish video that's doubled to 60. So then you're able to just set that back the way it was. Same with the 24 frames with the 3-2 pull down. I've gotten into that in other videos. We can go back to that if we need to, but that's at least, it makes sense in my brain because you have something that was originally progressive that you're just reverting back to its original form.
Yep.
So how I do that, I could probably make a video on it. There's probably better videos on there anyway that I could ever make, but it's at least straightforward because you're just simply reversing the content back to how it started. But what about just basic 480i deinterlacing? Um, shouldn't you be able to essentially weave or put the weaves back together? And what are the different like the QTMC? I'm forgetting that very fancy deinterlacing that's done via software. Why
Hmm.
is that better than methods? Can you kind of just walk us through that?
Yeah, I guess there's lots to go through. So if the original source was progressive, then problem solved. Because what's going to happen is when you interlace that media, most of the time, your interlaced fields are going to be pretty close together because you're breaking a single frame into two fields, and those fields aren't going to be too far apart. Where things get really tricky is if the camera that the content was filmed on was an interlaced camera. So it's actually capturing interlaced. Then what happens is every field is going to be different. You're going to have this like sort of slight variation between, imagine a camera's panning left to right, you're capturing every even line, you've moved across a little bit, you're capturing every odd line. That's when you get those big combing effects on those like high speed moving images. So the trick
Mm,
with those things is that when you then deinterlace them, you've got all that combing stuff, and then you have to do some sort of decombing, whatever, over the top of that. And there's heaps of different ways to do that, and it's a bit of law of diminishing returns as well. Like the more CPU you put into it, you're going to get like sort of smaller and smaller visual quality returns over time. There's only so much you can do to really rebuild that information. Like you can blur things, and you can use all sorts of like clever upscale filters, and a lot of this new AI filtering and upscaling that's come in can help as well. And that's kind of interesting too. Like there's a lot of questions now around within digital preservation, and like whether it's community efforts or like proper archival efforts about, should you keep the original interlaced media around because deinterlacing is going to get better over time, scaling is going to get better over time.
right.
We've now got like frame generation software that we're using in video games where we render so many frames per second and we're making up frames in between. We can do the same thing with video, and a lot of places are doing that. A lot of places that have to render high resolution content, especially if it's content that's quite I don't want to say simple because it's a bit insulting, but like if you've got like a simple pan across something and there's no people, like it's just some architecture, some buildings or something, or some, a nature scene or whatever, you can probably render half the frames at like some really, high CPU rendering level, and then use a lot of this AI software to sort of fill in the gaps with frames in the middle, similar to how we do in video games. So with all that in mind, if you've got content that you deinterlaced 5 years ago, and you upscale it to 1080p or whatever, if you had access to that same content today and you pushed it through the same amount of stuff for the same time frame of effort, you would get much nicer looking content. So
Right.
it's a bit of a tricky question. Like, what should we do? Should we keep the original around? Should we
So
upscale it?
let's
Do
stop
both?
that question now.
Mm,
Let's back up
sure.
and let's go through that a little slower. So there's two parts of that. I think the easiest part in my brain, at least with the knowledge I have now, my opinion is, yeah, if you're doing archival stuff, you want to save it in its original format. However, what is the original format? That's a debate that I thought I understood. And based on your explanation, I think I might, but a lot of people don't. And especially a lot of people who claim to work in NTSC video, I don't think they actually grasp that some cameras actually recorded in 480i.
Mm,
Because the debate is when you're saving this, especially if you scale it later, do you save it as like 1080p 5994 60 or 1080p 30? Because if you have interlaced video, wouldn't you be putting it back? Why are you changing, quote, changing the way people saw video? But I don't think people who say that understand that a lot of like home video cameras, don't those just record in 480i, so each field would actually be independent?
correct. Yeah. And so what you end up doing is, so again, imagine you've got a scene where you're panning left to right across something at a fairly decent rate. So you're going to be capturing like half the information per
Mm,
field, and then making that interlaced image. And again, that's why you get those combing effects. So like the ultimate deinterlacer, then, if such a thing existed, would be some sort of AI image reconstruction that would look at the frame before or the frame after, try and fill in the missing lines, reproduce that, and then make
mhm.
that double the frame rate. So if you, again, we'll stick with whole numbers. So if you're doing a 30 frame per second video where it was originally captured in interlaced, you would end up with a 60 frame per second video as your deinterlaced version, because those 30 fields would be doubled.
Right.
So that would sort of be the ultimate way to do that. Yeah, I get
Because
much like,
some software out there will call that double deinterlacing, and that's
yep,
not my term. That's inside the software, and that didn't make sense to me either. Because if it's 60 fields, 30 frames, deinterlacing that once would be a 60 frame per second video. So that's what I guess I didn't understand, is why
Yep.
they would call that double deinterlacing. Because if they sent video like that to 30p, you would actually be losing data. You'd be losing some info, because as motion is panning, things are changing and updating with each field, correct?
Yeah, it depends how you look at it. Like if you're merging the fields into single fields, yeah, I don't know. You're kind of losing a little bit of information, I guess, in terms of the raw field rate.
Mm-hmm.
But visually, and again, it really depends on the content. Like, there's a lot of argument to say, no, just make it 30 frames per second, merge that content, and you're getting kind of the intended output anyway.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Again, if you've got all the storage in the world, store it twice, right? Like, have your deinterlaced version, have your non-interlaced, your interlaced version and your deinterlaced version, and go with that.
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah, cool,
But
cool, cool.
so when would be a scenario in which you actually would want to save that as 2994 30p? Would that only be in an inverse telecine type of scenario in which it was originally progressive scan, or each field was really the same frame type of thing?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, a lot of this also comes down to artistic intent. Like, that is a thing that exists, and it's a thing that you have to consider with a lot of stuff. So, there's a lot of argument in, like, the film world, for example. Why is film still 24 frames per second? Why hasn't it, jumped to 48 or 60 or something else? Everything on Netflix is 24 frames per second, which is interesting when, TVs generally are 30/60, right? That would make more sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that artistic intent argument is there to, and a lot of people, a lot of directors of photography will say that they want that 24p because of the feel of film and the feel of cinema. So there's a bit of that too. So, and again, like, definitely in the commercial world, preservation's maybe a different thing, but definitely in the commercial world, it's down to whatever the customer wants. If the customer comes along and says, "Hey, it's got to be 24p," you're making 24p regardless of whether you think it looks crap or not. You can sort of try and influence them a little bit. There is still some demand, interestingly, for interlaced content. Like, there are people who want it coming back as 1080i, for example,
Which is
which is
insane to me, but okay.
I most of the people I know in commercial digital preservation agree. Like, they're like, why would you ever produce anything interlaced in
Right.
2024? But I do think it's a bit of a leftover. The broadcast industry is a bit different in that regard, in terms of, like, wanting to move ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, they the standards to them are things that, will never ever ever change, despite the fact that they have already. But yeah, there's that kind of thing going on. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, so artistic intent in original recording is definitely out of the scope of this conversation,
Right.
and mostly none of my business. The only argument I have is why are TVs still dealing with, why have TVs from the dawn of the flat panel sample and hold era not just been 48p compatible? Why are we still do 3.2 pull down? But that's another argument for another day. If somebody
Yep.
wants 24p, I get it, I understand. But from the perspective of, we just want to save this media.
Mm.
If something generally is interlaced coming from home video cameras, we save it in that, US 5994 or whatever it would be
Yep.
in PAL territories. And the only time that you might want to do different is if you know that the source was originally progressive scan, or originally, exactly 30. And the that could even be done in post, so you could actually just save it as the normal broadcast that you would have, 50, 60, whatever it was, and then in software later you could do that, provided it's not mixed content, which, that if there's time we'll get to that at the end,
Mm.
of course. So
Yeah, for me,
um
that's what I would do. I think, like, given the choice, I would say, make it 60 frames per second progressive, and then, if the end user wants to throw away half the frames, so be it. Like, they can turn on BFI, they can turn on some sort of post production type stuff, right? It's throwing content away at playback time is not a problem. Generating content at playback time is a problem. So go with the one where you're giving them too much information, and let them decide what to do at playback time. I think that would be my recommendation to anyone who's on the fence about which way to go.
Absolutely. So now it brings us to how we record that video. So the hardware side of things, I'm completely deep in that, and I'm pretty sure I have a solid grasp on that these days. The software side is where I still would love as many people's opinions as possible. So when you're going to 480i, when you've decided, hey, I want an original archival copy, and maybe I'll do two, maybe I'll use the Tink just to get an easy 4K copy, but I also want an archival copy. If you're going to Doomsday Problem Solved, it's way more complicated than everybody in that project makes it. It's you Linux folk that are always doing this. Oh, it's just whip out a command line and 75 lines of code later that you have to memorize, and you've totally got, yeah. No, it's very, very, very complicated, but it is the best. But it's not for everybody. And I truly think, just a quick aside, the strength of the Doomsday project isn't the quality. It's that if you have multiple of the same source, you could
Mm.
share that information together to
Yep.
essentially get better quality than you ever could have from one.
Yep.
But for a home video, I really doubt you'll ever be able to tell a
Mm.
difference at
Mm.
normal viewing distance, from a really high quality copy that's just recorded. So from that point of view, what software codecs, and then also just to double check, what frame rate, do you record in that for NTSC 480i 2994, knowing that it's, even though you're 2997,
Yep. Yep.
knowing that it's actually recording each of the fields. Do you use Lagarith? Do you just use completely uncompressed, which is a bit ridiculous? What are your suggestions for that?
Again, kind of depends. If you so Library of Congress have got their FFV1 codec, which
Mhm.
is two things that FFV1 do different to other codecs is, number one, it is a lossless codec. So think of it like FLAC for audio, right? So
Mhm.
FLAC is it's a audio. It's FLAC. It uses the LZ type compressors and the Huffman type compressors and all that kind of stuff, similar to like um, Zip and 7-Zip and LZMA and Z-Stand and all that kind of stuff. But what they also do is because it understands audio a little bit better, it can make some better optimization choices around audio. So FLAC gives you what, like 2:1, maybe 3:1 on a good day, compared to like whatever MP3 or more modern
Right.
codecs that will give you like 10:1 or 100:1 or whatever crazy stuff they're doing
And
these
it's
days.
mostly compressing the information that doesn't matter. Your ears can't hear. It's empty space.
Well, that's
Whereas, MP3 is compressing everything down,
Yeah, so
right?
yes, that's right. So yeah, there's FLAC is completely lossless. You won't even the
Mhm.
unheard stuff. You'll compress and you'll keep that. So
And just shout
FFE
out to Artemio. He's also proven this with MD4EA time after time after time. But
definitely, yeah. Yeah, and so like you should with FLAC, you should be able to. You do, in fact, you can if you did a checksum like a SHA-256 checksum of a WAV file. If you FLAC compress it and then FLAC decompress it, you'll get the same SHA-256. So it's bit perfect, right? It is zero loss. FFV1 is the same for video, only video. So not the audio track. You've got to go do something else with the audio track. But the video track for FFV1 will be the same. It's completely lossless. And the other thing that FFV1 does is that you can scrub with it. So there's no keyframe type stuff that you get with, because it's lossless, but also because of the way that it's made, you can scrub back and forth. The downside is there's zero acceleration for it. It's all CPU bound, and it's really kind of hard on your CPU. And again, you're not going to save a whole lot of space compared to lossy compressors. That's kind of obvious, but that's the way that stuff works. So if it's something where
So there are
you
a few downsides of FFV1 from a me point of view, not from a broadcast archival point of view.
correct,
Depending on your settings, it's not that much smaller than completely uncompressed, which we'll get to the RGB versus YUV color space in a minute.
yep,
But also, nothing knows what it is. So Premiere has no clue what it is. You have to
right,
convert that before going to Premiere. Most video players don't know what that is.
correct.
And I can't remember if I've tried, but I'm pretty sure most little streaming boxes or even the fancier Oppo Blu-ray players aren't going to be able to read that either,
Yeah,
because
definitely
it's
not
more of an
hardware players.
archival format.
Correct. Yeah.
So
So
that's
like,
one of the reasons why I'm always looking for alternatives to that as well.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's the sort of thing where, it's a alternative to zip basically for video is essentially how you have to think about it. And if you want to access it, then you're going to transcode it to something else to play it, probably to something lossy. But then, the idea being that over the course of many, many years, you can then retranscode that over time and then pick better and better codecs as you go. So, I mean, the other thing is that this is always a moving target, right? So, codecs exist because they're designed for whatever the current CPU is. It's about CPU time expense. So,
Hmm.
when things like H.264, H.265, and the upcoming H.266 are being built, when they're being developed, typically speaking, it takes like a good 10 years for them to develop these codecs. If you look at from when specs get published to when like beta versions get released to when things go mainstream to when they hit hardware, like there's a pretty big gap there. Generally speaking, you can pretty much be guaranteed that like nobody is doing real time of any of these codecs when they're being developed. It's going to take like 5-6 times the amount of time to encode things, with the vision that, by the time this hits the market and by the time we've developed these tools, then they'll probably be real time-ish, and then after that we can develop ASICs and FPGAs and whatever else to accelerate these things and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of a sort of a long-term goal with those sorts of things. And yeah, like they get better over time. Like for the same bit rate, 265 will give you better quality than 264. For a lower bit rate or for a better compression, you'll get the same visual quality out of
At
265
a
compared to
smaller size.
264. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's kind of the goal of each of these sort of codecs. If you really, really care and you've got a lot of time, because it takes a hell of a lot of time, Netflix have got a free bit of software called VMAF. It plugs into FFmpeg, and it is a visual quality. It'll judge the visual quality of video information with reference to something else. So think of it a bit like MD Fourier, right? You need a
Mhm.
reference and you need an output, and you need to compare the two. It's not like a score out of 10 based on nothing. It's got to be compared to something else. So it plugs in FFmpeg. You run your command, it'll run through two different videos and it'll give you kind of like a different score. And then you can do things like say, okay, if I use this codec or that codec or these settings, what's the score that I get out of it? And they've put a lot of science into it to try and make it very much aligned with how the human visual system works. So it's not just maths telling you how mathsy different it is, because that doesn't mean anything if you can't see it.
Right.
It's definitely like, things where like humans are more susceptible to brightness than they are to color. Humans are more
Mhm.
susceptible to like shades of green trigger our brightness more than shades of red or blue. So therefore those things are going to, tweak those numbers a bit more or a bit less. So it's those sorts of things that VMF puts into it. So again, it is a terrible open source command line piece of shit, and everyone hates it. But it's probably it is a subjective tool still. I wouldn't call it an objective tool, but it's the most objective thing we've got at the moment. Where if you really want to like make that decision for yourself, you could do it. You could get yourself a sample bit of footage. Um, have your original version, put it through a compressor of choice, compare the however many different compression options you've done. That's going to take you, potentially days, depending on how much footage that you're throwing at it to do those measurements. Get those numbers back, and then go, okay, from there, VMF says this is the best one. That's one we're going to roll forward with all my home preservation stuff. Probably
So,
worth it if you care.
that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be the perfect, OCD way to analyze
Yeah.
video after you've converted it.
Yep.
So you want to archive in some lossless format, and then after you've done your conversion, then you could use that software to say, "Hey, I've been experimenting, and I have this incredibly rare footage that needs to be archived because it's super important. So I got the original. I just did it uncompressed, giant file. Who cares? Just to make sure it's cool. Or maybe I got it doomsday, whatever. It doesn't matter. But now you have that original file, so you scale it and compress it a bunch of different ways and use that to figure out what was the best way to upscale it.
Yep.
That makes perfect sense for broadcast production, for super important archival
Mhm.
work. For home videos, I mean, just Simon's GUI for FFmpeg and AVI synth Bravocon. It's been great when it works. Simon's working on it a little bit more.
Right.
But I'm still kind of stuck at the archival thing. So if FFV1 isn't going to work for you because you would also, because when you talk about archival stuff, you also have to think about people coming after you. So, if you have a hard drive where you're like, hey, after I die, this is all my family's footage. This is really important. If you care, here you go. 10 years goes by, 20 years, whatever, you pop that thing into a new computer and none of the files play. And you think, oh, the drive's dead. FFV1 could end up in that scenario, whereas a completely uncompressed will always play. And as computers get faster, you probably play it
Yep.
on your thumbnail sized watch in the future, but it's not a problem.
Yep.
So with that in mind, are there other codecs that would provide the same thing but with more compatibility? And
Yeah, that is
Lagarith used to be it, but Premiere just stopped reading Lagarith in the past year and a half. I don't know why. It just
such a
dropped
tricky
it.
question. Hey, like you think about like Cinepack and those sorts of codecs that were
Mhm.
pretty huge in the 90s. If you stuck a Cinepack encoded video into a Windows desktop PC today, would it play? Probably not. I don't think it would. Without something like VLC or some open source bit of stuff that's based on
Right.
libav and FFmpeg and the hard work that those people do. So it's a really tricky one, and I think it's one of those things where I'm obviously hugely pro open source, and I push open source because of longevity. You've got
Mhm.
a marginally better chance that someone can at least do something with that source code. But again, you as an average buffhead, if you don't know how to do the open sourcey stuff, then it's just as useless to you as a proprietary solution that doesn't work. So that it is a tricky one. There's a lot of arguments where people we'll go with the most popular one because the most popular one is likely to be the thing that you want to do. I don't know if that's even a valid solution. Again, Cinepack was some of the most popular stuff for a while, and it's so hard to play that today. I've spent just the last 48 hours based on one of our RetroRGB co-writers diving into Dolby Pro Logic 2 stuff, and that's proved to be amazing that you just can't decode that anymore.
Mm.
Although I've found a way to do it through FFmpeg, ironically. But again, it's totally out of the realm of anybody who, your only option is to jump on eBay and find an old Pro Logic 2 decoder. And it's like, well, what happens when the last one of those disappears? So yeah,
Right.
it's super tricky. I don't know. At this point in time, the longest lived format that I know of is DVD, which is kind of terrible.
Yeah.
Like I have customers who still make DVDs commercially, so it's crazy that's still a thing.
So maybe the answer is FFV1 or completely uncompressed, and you leave a note on your hard drive and you leave the files on your hard drive like, hey,
Mm.
here's VLC player. Uh, I can't believe I'm drawing drawing a blank on this one, but where you don't need the installation, the portable version. So
Yeah.
you just
Yep.
open up the exe, you leave a note, and that's just the answer to the problem then.
Assuming someone can run Windows binaries 10, 15, 20 years into the future. Like that's still a problem too. Like try and run old versions of iTunes or whatever, old Macs, new Macs. Like those things are tricky. Try running.
True, but VMs would help for that one.
Very much so, yeah. So if you can get away with it being unaccelerated and you just want something to convert from point A to point B, then yeah, backing up binaries is a good thing as well. Making sure you've got an old copy of something lying around with your video and some instructions on how to use it. Yeah, definitely. It's someone pointed out to me a little while ago, and I thought it was one of the funniest ironies ever that we can read things on the side of ancient buildings that are thousands of years old that were chiseled in stone, but can you read something off a hard drive that's 20 years old? Maybe. So
Yeah.
we seem, as a species, we're creating more data, but we're getting worse at prolonging it. It's a really interesting problem.
Yeah, it's funny. I got a couple of comments that were saying things like, well, why do you even bother? Because magnetic tape media is going to outlast digital anyway. Did you not watch the Tink video where I just
Yeah.
waved a magnet around it and
Yep.
ruined the tape? That's why you need both.
Yeah.
Sure, if you're in a Faraday cage, yeah, a climate controlled one, that magnetic tape might last forever, or longer
Definitely.
than digital, but you got to have both.
So some of the stuff that I deal with as well is like big scale data. So I've got a couple of customers who, their data sets are in the 60, 70 petabyte kind of range. And they put all their stuff on LTO tape. So they're pushing stuff out to LTO 7, LTO 8, LTO 9. So these things should sit on a shelf in a climate controlled environment for 50 to 70 years and last. Not always. A lot of these
Yeah.
places by policy will write a lot of their stuff out to 2 or 3 tapes as a minimum. Like that's the policy. And within sort of 20 years, some of these tapes come back and they don't. Some of them just won't work. So that's a tricky one as well. Magnetic
Mm.
media is definitely not the fail safe. Temperature affects that, humidity affects that, mold affects that, all those sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I've seen long term. We had a lot of floods here in Brisbane some years back, and I saw a lot of long term archive places that tapes didn't get wet, but because water went through the place and because we have really hot, humid summers here in Brisbane, they got a lot of mold, and then mold grew on the tapes, and all the tapes were destroyed, even though they didn't get wet in the floods. So it's keeping things alive for a long time is very, very tricky.
Yes. Yes, it is. And at the very least, if you have a hard drive and you just copy it, like me, I still have data from the 90s, but every time I get a new computer and a new NAS, I just recopy that over. So that's why
Absolutely.
it's
Yep.
still survived and easy to just click on.
Yep. I,
Um,
I, I wrote a guide on my website years and years ago about like the sort of the high level concepts of digital preservation. And absolutely the number one trick is to just keep data alive, keep it moving, multiple copies on different types of media in different locations. Diversity is the key, right? It's a bit like biology. Diversity
yeah.
is the key to survival for that stuff. Yeah.
Back when RetroRGB would fit on a Blu-ray, I would once a month burn a Blu-ray and just mail it to my brother, knowing that, BDRs aren't going to last more than a couple of years, but neither is the data. The data is
Yep.
changing on the website all the time, so it was
That's it.
fine. And
Yeah.
and then it very quickly just got way too big for that. So now I just back it up in many places here. But so to continue on the archival side, right? So FFV1 or just completely uncompressed if you're crazy, which by the way, if you're just getting clips to edit something, and if you're me, not if you're in the pro world, going 480i uncompressed isn't bad at all.
Mm.
It's very quick to work in a Premiere timeline, and you can get those clips, make your video, and delete them all when you're done, or recompress them when you're done to FFV1 or whatever else. And
Yep.
so that's a cool trick that I would share for content creators, but for people digitizing, FFV1 might be it. Um, and 480i, stick with the formats that your capture card is going to recognize. So the 2997, even though it's 60 frames, there's 2 fields in each of those. So that works. But what about most really good capture cards still only record 480i video in YUV color format? Some of the other higher end ones, like the Osprey one I have, offer to capture that in RGB color space. But the analogy that I was kind of seeing with this is that would be like taking a DVD, ripping it to your hard drive, and converting it to lossless, uncompressed. It's already got the MPEG compression on it. This
Yep.
video format's already in YUV, so shouldn't you save that as YUV 2997 480i?
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on the type of YUV. So if you've got like 444, 422, all that kind of stuff, like 444 is the same as RGB, right? So there's
Mhm.
no loss. It's only when you do chroma subsampling and you get into 422 or 420 that things become a bit iffy. The bigger question is whether if you're going to re-edit. So you always anything where you're going to do mathematical operations on things. If you want to color correct something or apply some gamma or whatever, you definitely want that in the highest bit rate, lowest compression, highest sort of the most significant figures of maths, because then you're going to get the best result on those sorts of things. So you'll get like, for example, if you've got like blue gradient in the sky or something like that, it's probably going to look the same if you do like YUV 420 versus RGB because it's like some crappy content that you've ripped off a VHS or whatever. But yeah, if you're going to do a lot of grading, editing kind of stuff on that, then definitely try and capture as high as you can and do the editing in those steps before you sort of crunch it down to something else. If you're just ripping DVD, for example, you can just rip the because DVD is YUV. You can rip the raw YUV straight off the DVD and just deal with that, and then you're not transcoding or capturing per se. It's just a rip. But yeah, if it's coming off something where you do have to rip the content or capture the content, sorry, in the case of like VHS, you're capturing off S video or something or through TINC or whatever. Yeah, then
Right.
really it'd be like if you're just dumping it straight to a video file and you don't care, who cares? If you're going to do something to it, especially any kind of like color grading, anything on a curve, heuristics, not
Mhm.
heuristics, what do you call it? Where you do your levels and all that kind of stuff. Any of that kind of stuff, then yeah, I would, as an intermediate format, definitely something better before crunching it down. So I guess, same sort of theme as what we've been talking about the whole time. Really, it's like, what do
Right.
you want to do with it? How much mucking around do you want to do with it before it's going to go to a format, and you're going to knowingly sacrifice some quality for some space, given the technology you've got at the time.
Isn't composite in S-Video 420 anyway, no matter what?
S video itself is, I mean, it's analog, so it's kind of difficult. I mean, there's definitely the chroma resolution of VHS is much lower than
It's
the
250 TVL. Yeah, it's
yeah
very,
yeah
very low quality signal.
yeah. And then, so then you had the whole like VHS versus super VHS, and there was some extra quality in the super, depending if it
450
was,
lines in the
yeah, if
super,
it was
yeah.
real super or marketing super or whatever. Because
And
then that
just a
was
quick aside, SVHS stands for Super VHS, meaning you're getting more lines of data. It doesn't necessarily mean S video. They're completely
correct,
independent because all
correct.
VHS is recorded with Chroma and Luma, YC separate,
Yep,
which is confusing. And this is why I didn't get it for years. It wasn't until a year and a half ago that I started to really understand the differences between those. So
right.
really massive fail on the marketing department, SVHS people. But
Yeah, just everything. I think, like, I'm again going through all this prologicy stuff that I've been playing with this week, like looking at the difference between the actual science of how this stuff worked and the marketing of how it was presented to consumers. It's really a wonder how any of this stuff ever succeeded. Like, they did such a terrible job of just explaining, and you don't have to explain it in full propeller head mode, right? Like, you can
right.
explain the stuff with some analogies and some basics that the average kind of, a little bit right of the center of the bell curve kind of person is going to get, and probably go, oh yeah, no, I should actually spend 10% more and get this better thing, and it'll be better for me long term, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. There was a lot of, especially in the 90s, there seemed to be a lot of hand waving magic about, ooh, it's magic. It's like, it's not. It's just maths. We can understand
Yeah.
maths. Yeah.
So, in the context of home videos, then, um, would recording it in YUV color space FFV1 to save a lot of space on your hard drive, and then that's your archival copy. And then when you want to eventually, if you're going to just upscale it using a drag and drop program, cool, that's probably going to be fine. But someday you want to go back and do some editing to then convert that to RGB color space uncompressed, just that full huge file,
Yeah.
would you lose data that way if you originally record it in YUV?
If you, so again, your YUV will depend on if you're chroma subsampling as well. So so YUV is not an absolute thing. There's whether or not you, yeah. So if you're doing 422 or 444, so if you're doing YUV 444 and RGB, that from a practical standpoint, they're basically the same. From a mathematical standpoint, from a space standpoint, whatever. If you drop down to 422, where you really see it is those really fine gradients and things. That's really where it kind of stands out.
Mm,
So you could make a subjective call. You could say things like, okay, if I'm doing a lot of stuff where it's like, the details are also already a little bit rough, like I'm in dark areas, or I've got some gradients, or like there's sky stuff and I don't want big banding in the sky or whatever, then subjectively make that call, say I'm going to put that at a higher bit rate. If it's something where it's like, optimal solutions, it's a fairly diverse scene, there's like good lighting, all that kind of stuff, then yeah, whatever, 422 420, save your space, who cares? Yes,
mm,
technically you're throwing away information, but if later on you want to do your editing, yeah, you can bump that up to RGB uncompressed. You can do your editing in that color space. You're from a human being eye point of view, the visual change won't be too lossy. Um, then you do all your effects and whatever else, and then crunch it back, and it should be okay. So again, like, unfortunately, there's no sort of black and white, hard and fast rules about any of this. That's kind of the challenge.
I guess the black and white rule would be then whatever is the highest mode that your capture card would accept, you should just run it at. So like most 480i capture cards, even very good ones, they don't have a choice. You just
Mm.
very often YUV2, YUV, whatever.
Yep.
But I'm looking at the choices for the Osprey card, and there's RGB8, RGB555, RGB24, RGB32, a bunch of different YUVs, I420. Sounds like something I should smoke, not record in, but it's so for that, it's like, do I just go RGB 32 at 2997 for 480i and just say, forget it? This is just go to the highest quality.
um, I would say you're probably not going to get any huge benefit out of going from 8-bit per channel higher than that. So if that 32 is 32-bit per channel, that's pretty crazy. If it's 32-bit all up, um, you know, um, it's not going to be that much better than 24-bit all up, 8-bit per channel. So because that source content is so low already. So really, like for SDR content, where it's coming off VHS, RGB 8-bit per channel is probably all you really need. Some of my customers capture film through very good, like, so they have film scanners. So they're high quality machines that are designed from the ground up for scanning high frame rate film quickly. So they can do real time 6K scans of like 35 millimeter film, and they capture generally at 16-bit per channel. So 48-bit color all up. That's what they capture at. At 6K res. So that comes out pretty huge. You're doing, I think the maths works out to be like a gigabyte and a half per second. It's about 15 gigabit per second of raw. That's just video data. So then you've got to go and do the audio capture separately and then glue them together later. So that's kind of like preservation quality stuff that they're doing at that level. And then they're just doing that on linear scale. So afterwards, they can go and then turn that into whatever kind of HDR, perceptual quantizer kind of curves or whatever to try and turn it into whatever's the current HDR standard. But everything they're capturing is just pure linear at that point. So it's a bit weird, and they do it for specific reasons. But yeah, at home when you're coming off a thing that's already, and again, like they're trying to capture film, which technically has like infinite resolution down to
Right.
molecules
Yeah.
at least, right?
Something that you've recorded on a 250 TVL
Yeah.
handheld camera
Yep.
that you bought at Sears in the
Yep.
90s is not going to have that kind of detail.
No. So I would personally, I would probably cap out at 8-bit RGB, 8-bit per channel RGB. Like there wouldn't be a
Okay.
huge amount of benefit going over that, I don't think. And again, unless you're doing some crazy, color correction, or either it's terrible quality and you're trying to fix it, or whether that's like magnetic degradation or whether it was just like a shitty overcast day and there wasn't enough light and you're trying to boost some colors. Then your working space, make that a little bit higher perhaps if you want to get the maths to look a little bit less grainy and terrible. But yeah, other than that,
So
I can't.
basically, that rule of thumb of just record at the highest quality your capture card allows is probably the safest bet, because you're not
Definitely.
talking about you're not
Yeah.
talking about terabytes of data to rip a
No.
home video.
No,
So
not at those sizes, definitely.
I actually found that a FFV1, or even really fully uncompressed at RGB 32 with 480i 2997 is about the same as a compressed 4K file of the same thing. So
Yes. Yeah.
it's kind of interesting to see how it goes hand in hand, and how you're just gonna have to, if you're gonna do archiving work, you're just gonna have to buy an extra hard drive. Unless it's one or two things.
Yep.
But
Yep.
so
Yeah, and you can work out the maths pretty easily on that too, right? Like it's just x pixels by y pixels by how many bytes per pixel, and then do the maths, and then it's like, this is my upper bounds of how big my hard drive's got to be, how fast my hard drive's got to be, the latency I expect, that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and if you're doing Doomsday, you might end up with one drive per rip.
Yep.
Which, if you're getting, because that, for cost effective reasons, buying one of the 30 terabyte drives that's supposed to be out any day now to put 5 or 6 things on it would be way more expensive than just buying 5 or 6 much smaller drives that could fit each rip. So
Yep.
that's certainly something people got to consider. But
I do a lot
um,
of floppy disk preservation stuff as well, and so I use a product called Greaseweasel. So it's an open source, pretty much what Doomsday does, but it's reading the magnetic flux on a floppy drive, a bit like Apple Source. And there's a few proprietary Apple ones out there
Mm.
doing the Flux Reader or something is another one. But yeah, Greaseweasel, good project. Runs off a little like $5 Arduino. You plug it into a floppy drive. It reads the magnetic information off a floppy. So your average like 1.4 meg floppy, or if you had like I've got a lot of Super Nintendo, Super Famicom disc copy devices, and they could format to the full
You mean you
1.6.
allegedly
Yeah,
have a
yeah, yeah,
couple of
yeah,
disc?
yeah. Yeah, I've already had a copyright strike on YouTube once this week, so got to be careful. Yeah, so they can format to the full like 1.6 meg, and so they're quite tricky. They used to be really easy to read on like DOS machines, where it was like whatever, just read the damn thing. And now on like if you get a USB floppy, they just won't read because they've got custom firmware on them and all sorts of stuff that hard lock to things. So Greaseweasel's nice. It comes along, just reads the raw magnetic data, gives you that sample, and then you can, after the fact, just like Doomsday, after the fact, go and translate that back into some sort of data. And the lovely thing about it is, just like Doomsday, you can keep the magnetic rips for as long as you want. And if the Fourier maths implementations get better and more accurate or whatever, and can do better sampling to turn that back into more accurate data, you can do that years later, even though you've just got that original rip. So they take about 80 megabytes per sample. So 1.4 meg floppy turns into 80 megabytes of data. So that's a pretty dramatic. It's like a 40 times increase in data. Yeah, so I imagine what one of these big laser discs must take a hell of a lot of data, especially if you're going to do multiple samples and multiple discs and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely something I'm interested in because I have at the very least, I have like the video. I don't know. It's a gloomy day. My brain's not working right, but Video Essentials. I have
Oh,
the
yep.
laser disc of that, and it's one of the people on the Doomsday Discord, which are, by the way, mostly really nice and friendly and cool people there. But I was like, yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting my rips, so maybe we could share ours and get the best detail. And they were like, well, I already have it ripped, so why would you need to do that? It's like, oh, it's the whole
Okay.
point of this project.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's get, and especially for something that has, a true example of composite video output because it's
Mm,
encoded in that without DVD compression, without the low line count of VHS. This would actually be a really perfect example to use as test data, and you could even use this to test other equipment. So that
yep,
would be the perfect scenario for everybody that has one of those Video
yep.
Essentials laser discs to rip it and put all the data together. So
Definitely. And you can, I mean, I can think of countless projects where, the laser disc was fairly unique in some way. Later Blu-rays or DVDs came along and didn't do nearly as good a job. Like you see it all the time. If you're into physical media, you see it all the time where there's like really good examples of well scanned film that they turn into UHD disc, and really bad examples. Even super popular movies, Terminator 2 is not a good version of that anywhere. Star Wars, for example, where you've got the Lucas edits, like that kind of stuff. Like there's so many examples where it's like, yeah, like finding 5, 6 laser discs around planet Earth and everybody sharing is a really good thing if we can do that. And potentially that exists for VHS too. There's got to be an example of that somewhere as well, where VHS is the only version of something, and we should really work together to try and build the ultimate version of that before it vanishes forever.
absolutely, and a lot of people really are understanding that, and, my tease was just a tease. There's,
Yeah.
people are really getting on board for this. Just a quick aside, this has been really noisy. There's construction across the street. It just started pouring outside, so I'm riding the volume the entire time on this, trying to shut myself off whenever I'm not talking, so if the audio is even worse than usual on these, my apologies, and it's me, it's not on Dan's side of things. Um, so yeah, I think we've really nailed the whole visualization of what to do for archiving 480i, and I think it's very clear that this is important, and I think you've clarified the some of the processes of it, especially somewhere between Doomsday and then just using a video processor to capture in HD, which you know I still think the point I made in that video stands true, in that sometimes that's the perfect solution, but
Mm.
there is no perfect solution. There is no
No, definitely.
one perfect thing, because even though Doomsday could technically be that, it's still very complicated, very time consuming, and all that stuff.
there's always trade-offs, right? Like even today, I get in this discussion a lot with people around, whether they should use hardware accelerated codecs or pure software codecs. Like that's a very common question I get
Yeah.
often, right? And even that has trade-offs. Like if you value your time, of course you're going to use hardware accelerated. If you value quality, then use like the most painfully slow software encode you can, because you will get better quality, but you're trading, a lot of electricity and a lot of time and a lot of whatever else to get that done. Deinterlacing, we've talked about now, like, do you do it real time on the Tink? Do you do it after the fact through YDIF and FFmpeg and that kind of stuff? All of those have time trade-offs versus electricity trade-offs versus effort trade-offs, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely not a perfect solution for anything. It's just how much effort, and again, a lot of diminishing returns on a lot of this stuff, right? Like you can go to the nth
Yeah.
degree for an extra 1% if you want, but it kind of hurts.
Yeah. And for mixed content, for stuff like the X Files example I used in that video, so it was originally shot 24p, but when they were editing it, it was converted to 480i with 3.2 pull down, and then they put their edits on top of it. Not only their effects, but it was, I believe, edited that way.
Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying here just to make the point. So in situations like that, just ripping the data however you can and trying to post process later if you even can would be the right scenario, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So same
Definitely.
thing, 480i 2997, highest capture that your device allows, and then
Yep.
if you could inverse telecine or kind of figure out what to do later, cool. But if not, at the very least, you just have the rip the way it was broadcast on TV back in the day.
That's it. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So very simple procedure for an amazingly complicated thing that it very oftentimes can't even be figured out. So
Yes. Yeah. And again, like it's if you can sacrifice the space today, then hopefully later on you can come up with a better solution, and that's that trade
yeah,
off as well. Yeah, for sure.
I think that's why Firefly never got a real true Blu-ray transfer, because there is a Blu-ray, but the content is it's striking, especially if you watch it on a plasma or an OLED TV.
Right.
You'll see a scene where just people talking and it looks beautiful, and then you see another scene that had all their effects applied and it looks like a badly scaled DVD, because essentially that's what they did, I think. So
Definitely. I've worked on a lot of productions where like the final deliverable is 4K or 8K for cinema, and the effects are being done at 2K. And so then whether it's those scenes are being scaled down, we're applying the effects at 2K and scaling the whole lot up. Whether we do the effects at 2K and then scale them up to 4K and composite them back into the scene or whatever. So it really depends on so much. It depends on budget. It depends on will they notice. It depends on they want this yesterday. We're already over time. That kind of stuff. So it happens a lot
yeah.
in filmmaking. It's a no. Nobody's got infinity time and budget. If they did, things would be a lot nicer. But that's not a reality.
But
So
we'd only get a fraction of the content that we get.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
like
That too.
it's
Yeah,
like
things.
my videos. If I made everything perfect before I released it, I'd release one video a month, not 2 to 3 a week. So
Yeah,
it's
I
just it
I
is
don't
what it
even
is.
know how you punch them out at the rate that you do. It's crazy. I've
Ugh.
got like 4 on the go that are like half edited and half written and half filmed, and I'm like, they suck. Back to the trash. Yeah.
Ugh. So we could fill days talking about post processing, but from an oversimplified point of view, when people have that 480i file and they go to process it, I do like Bravicon a lot just because I love Simon's approach to here's a very simple GUI. It either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, your file might not be encoded in exactly the way. There might be something else wrong, but it is dummy proof. And I say that I'm talking about myself here, not other people.
In a way, it's interesting because it's so we've got tools in broadcast and both in like the broadcast post production world, but also in the preservation world, called QC tools, right? So they're tools that
Mhm.
check for the validity of media to make sure it's not doing anything crazy, it's not dropping frames, duplicating frames, it's not outside a legal broadcast range, blah 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 blah. The nice thing about Bravicon is that if it doesn't play through that, you've probably done something wrong. So it's a bit of a like litmus test before you even start, right? Like, so if it works through that, cool. If it doesn't work through that, well, either you've got something highly custom or you've got something highly broken. So
Mm.
maybe that's a pretty good test to start with, at least.
Yeah. But to break it down a little bit more, so uh, is software like FFmpeg, AVI Synth, basically the Bravocon's a GUI for all that.
Yep.
Is that deinterlacing first? And I'm walking this out to visualize. So is it going from 480i to 480p and then scaling from 480p up, or is it doing it all at the same time?
So the answer you're going to hate is it depends. It comes down to we sort of chatted about this on Discord. So you got to think of FFmpeg like a bit like the example I always use is like Unreal Engine, right? So
Mhm.
you can make games out of Unreal Engine, and really what they are is a collection of the engine and some assets and your custom workflow and whatever that turns into a delivered thing that you use and give to someone. And it's got a GUI and all that kind of stuff hanging off it. Whereas Unreal Engine itself is not that. Unreal Engine is kind of an unlimited amount of tools that you can make an unlimited amount of things out of. So think of
Mhm.
FFmpeg like that. FFmpeg has got a thing called FFmpeg filters. And within FFmpeg filters, there's a thing called FFmpeg complex filters. So complex filters are pretty cool with FFmpeg. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff, and you can really choose any combination, permutation, order, overlap. Do you scale first and then deinterlace? Do you deinterlace then scale? Some of that will come down to whether or not the codecs allow it. So there are codecs out there that just will not allow interlaced frames. They just flat out
Right.
will reject it. There's codecs out there that only allow interlaced frames because they're so old. They come from an era where that's all there was. There's stuff that allows both, right? So H.264, H.265, I think H.265 still does. I haven't even checked. Definitely H.264 allows interlaced frames. So with that, you can do things where you could do, for example, very high quality H.264 real-time capture transcode and then scale and deinterlace after the fact. So if you set your bitrate to some ludicrous amount, you're still going to save whatever 20% off the top of RAW or something, but you're going to get something that's visually indistinguishable from RAW. And
Mhm.
then after the fact, you can go and deinterlace with a non-real-time deinterlacer. Although these days CPUs are so fast, it doesn't matter. You can use something like UDIF and UDIF2 real-time. I'm pretty sure on most CPUs, depending on content size. But yeah, like the different scalars, for example. So within FFmpeg, there are, that I know of, I think there's 4 different families of scalars, and within those families of scalars there's like, I don't know, a dozen different algorithms each, right? So you've got your standard bilinears and trilinears, you've got your various ones that do all sorts of like edge smoothing and edge detection, that kind of stuff. Now you've got a bunch of stuff that can offload onto OpenCL, Vulkan. They can get piped through OpenCV, which is a new open source um, image processing library that can do all sorts of crazy stuff. There's a lot of AI coming to that as well. I use the term AI loosely because it's not like, you know what I'm
Right. Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, all those sorts of tools are sort of coming on board now, where you can pipe them through all these different things. So again, it's back to that kind of conversation before of like, well, if you did this 5 years ago versus today, you can get much better results today. But you would have had to hold on to that raw footage for 5 years. And is that something you're willing to do? And are you willing to go and pull out all of your old content that you ripped 5 years ago and re-deinterlace all that for 5% better quality? Um,
Right.
yeah, it's up to you. But yeah,
So
definitely.
the oversimplified answer to that is there's no way to say something like, oh yeah, if you just deinterlace first and then scale later, that's the right way to do it. It totally depends on the codecs, the algorithms, how each one of these processes work. There's sometimes if you scale first, then you might be able to use that scaled data, meaning the
Yep,
algorithms might be able to use the scaled data to do the deinterlacing, which
yep.
might look better. Other times just don't, there is no rule of thumb of like, oh yeah, go from 480i to 480p first. And then like, that just doesn't exist because there's just way
Yeah,
too much
correct.
involved.
It's definitely codec dependent is a big one. So you do have to, if you've got, I would recommend to anyone to get pretty familiar with, say, 3 or 4 different codecs, right? And try and like look through all the options and see what's there. If you care about this, if you really, really care about this, if you're going to sit down hardcore for the next 6 months and back up, the rip whatever, you've got 100 VHS tapes of family photos or a family video that you want to preserve, it's worth your time to spend 2 or 3 days just stuffing about with different codecs and seeing what they look like and seeing what the results are. There will be ones where they will scale interlaced footage well, and then you can deinterlace that to produce a cleaner deinterlaced image than deinterlacing something low resolution and then trying to scale it after the fact. So those sorts of situations will exist depending on the codec, depending on the scaling algorithm. Yeah, so it's worth your time to do that, I think. But I mean, it's back to this, like, it's not easy. It's not one click. It's not simple. It's not. You do kind of
Yeah,
have
I
to.
have a slightly different opinion on that based on all the testing I've done. I'm looking at my desktop now. I have like 4 different programs that are all just GUI wrappers for all of this other command line based stuff. I've done exactly what you're saying, and it's my opinion that if you have 20, 100 tapes, using a tank going directly, or any scaler that doesn't do a crap job, not one of those
Mm,
Amazon $10 boxes,
yep.
but I'm using tanks because they are very good.
Yeah.
And then going through that, as you're recording this footage, just make notes, because one of the things that I found is when I digitized all of my family's tapes 15 years ago or whatever, nobody nobody is going to sit there and watch the entire recording that my dad had through one of the Disneyland rides. Like, it's just, no one cares. It's
Yep.
not a thing at all. So recording all of that in, you know, either recording it all in 480i and then just going back and scaling whichever ones that are important to you, or just recording everything through a tank, throwing them up on YouTube in 1080p or 4K, and let your family say, hey, just tell them, like, let me know exactly what's your favorite. So your family emails you a list of 4 clips that are 30 seconds each. Then go back and re-rip those uncompressed 480i and take the time to do it with those. I think that's certainly how I'm going to be approaching it, because when I
Mm-hmm.
did that for my family, they all watched the DVD, but even then, I cut all of that stuff because no one's going to sit there for a 20-minute thing, and it's humans are getting better at that. I mean, part of it's the lower attention span, but when camcorders first came out, it's like, oh, I want to bring this experience home. But now nobody sits there with their camera for an entire 30-minute ride, knowing that you're not going to sit there and watch that.
Yep.
So taking the parts that are important to you are certainly the things that that you should spend the time. Or, once again, of course, I'm talking home videos. If you're talking
Mm,
about lost important footage, then yes, take the
mm,
time to do this. But I actually, I keep bringing up BravoCon just because it's the easiest one out of all of the ones that I've used. It's just, Simon really nailed the basic point and click. And no, you don't get any of those extra options, but if you want all those extra options, yeah, now take the time to learn this stuff,
mm.
especially if you're going to be doing this for, a main focus. Um,
I
one of the
don't mind
problems
the.
that I've run in, oh, you go,
I
sorry.
was going to say I don't mind the approach. Like OBS, I think is not a bad. I mean, OBS can always be improved. Everything can always be improved. OBS, I think,
Right.
does a pretty good job in terms of they've got the simplified menu, and then they've got the advanced menu, and then they've got like the, if you want to get really really advanced, start typing in FFmpeg commands in this box, right? So there's kind of 3 levels there. I don't mind that either. I think that's not a bad approach to GUIs in general, where it's that approach of like, the default option that you present people is the 90% use case, and no scary buttons that freak people out, and then there's an advanced button there to click if you want that. I don't think that's too bad an approach, and I wouldn't mind if more applications did that, but that also means more testing, more development, more all that kind of stuff, right? And that's a lot
Right.
of effort, so I understand why people don't do that too.
One of the things that I ran into that Fudo pointed out to me that I don't think I would have noticed, because I was looking for different things, and that after I ran it through BravoCon, the field order was reversed. It wasn't
Okay.
correct. And uh, the problem that I run into is, whenever I work on this stuff, it's not how do I solve the problem for me, it's how do I teach people how to solve the problem for them. So one of the things that very quick example, my tapes from my childhood were all Super 8 format. So I found a high 8 player that I didn't even know was backward compatible until Fudo told me about it, and it's got S video output. So, okay, if you really care about this, then you could spend 5 minutes grabbing that Video Essentials DVD and running that rainbow test and recording it to a tape. So I just took one of my home videos that had like 15 minutes of blank space at the end. I recorded that pattern in composite and I recorded it in S video. and then I used the player to play it back through the Osprey card in both, and found that there was absolutely a noticeable difference playing back in S video,
Hmm.
regardless of how it was recorded, whether it was
Yep.
recorded in composite or S video. So that's my answer. Doesn't really matter what the quality of my parents' camcorder was, use the S video output. And that's a test that took 15 minutes. And even if you've never done this stuff before, maybe an hour if you're just walking through step by step, but now you know exactly what to do or what cable to use for each of your
Mm.
tests. So beautiful. Now I get to put that in the upcoming VHS video. How on earth am I going to try to do that for field orders? Is there test patterns? Is there anything that you would suggest? How do you trace it back? Was it the capture card? Was it the capture itself?
Yeah.
Did I use the wrong format? Is it Simon's in Bravicon? I could, maybe he could add a thing for this. Like,
Yeah. Well,
any suggestions there?
field order is definitely a thing that you can set in FFmpeg or anything that deals with interlacing, not just FFmpeg. Field order is definitely a thing, and different products, codecs, cameras, whatever, will have different field orders, and you've got to match them up. I was mentioning before QC tools that we have in broadcast. So QC tools will test for field order and do those tests internally to make sure they work. Unfortunately, the bulk of the QC tools that I use day to day with my customers are all quite expensive.
Hmm.
They're commercial, like broadcast quality tools. There is one that I know of, open source QC tool set, and it's written by the Media Info people. I don't know if you've ever used
Hmm.
Media Info. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
so they've got some QC tools. They're not, again, it's that, the downside of open source, where it's like it's written by a bunch of nerds for a bunch of nerds. It's not super intuitive to use, etc., etc. I think again, this
Just
all
leaving a note to
requires.
put the links in the description for everybody. We have the media info, their QC tools, and the Netflix ones too. I'll link to all the stuff
Yes.
that you've been
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
All great tools. And again, I think, there's nothing stopping people writing different GUIs, whether it's your handbrakes, whether it's your Bravicons, whether it's any of those sorts of things. There's nothing stopping people integrating a lot of these tools into their suites, again, other than human effort. So I get why they don't. It's definitely not a criticism. It's not, these people should do better. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
look at all my shitty open source software that I haven't completed, right? I've got like 10 projects on the go that are all like, I don't know, 25% finished at best. So I get it. I get why people don't do it. We just don't have infinite time in the world. But there's stuff out there. So I think it's a combo of, people being aware of it, and people asking for it. Like a lot of these developers often are quite friendly and are quite like, if you jump on their GitHubs into their discussion sections or you chat to them on their Discords or whatever, you'll have a lot of them who are like, well, I finished this major milestone. What's the next thing people would like? That's the opportunity to speak up and go, hey, what about integrating some basic, and again, like 80-20 rule, right? You don't have to do everything. Just, is the field order right? And a few other bits and pieces that kind of, my levels right and all that kind of stuff. And you can get the sort of, the common things that go wrong and again, it's those things where, a complete amateur would look at the footage and go, something's not right. Like there's definitely a human element of knowing that something's wrong, but not being able to quantify what that is. And QC tools could just turn that into a, red flag, this thing's wrong, fix it. So I think that kind of stuff would be good. But again, I understand why people don't do it or why they can't do it more than why they don't.
Mm. So I'll try to use the media info QC tools and try to. So basically, you would want to record a quick sample and then run it through that. Record a quick sample, scale it using whatever
Yep.
Bravicon, and then run both of those through the QC tool to double check that the field order matches.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that tool's got field order stuff, and there's like a number of checks it would do for standard. Are there duplicate frames? Are there drop frames? Are there all that kind of stuff? Like they'd pick all that kind of thing up. There's rules depending on, like, there's sort of a generic standard of rules that most people agree to, but X amount of duplicate frames per hour is acceptable. Yeah, often when if you deliver, like if you're making content to deliver to Netflix or to deliver to Amazon or whatever, they'll have those rules kind of set out, and these commercial QC tools will let you put in those specs, and then you'll get a report at the end of it to say whether or not the media matches those specs. And that's this open source media info based stuff. I've seen them working towards that. I think they're still developing it, still a bit to go. But they're doing okay stuff. But yeah, again, it's kind of a bit of an awareness thing, bit of an education thing. It is a bit complex to use as well. It's not super uh, point and click easy just yet.
Maybe somebody could make a drag and drop version of that, just in, out, go, and just specifically for this.
Yeah.
If that's something that's easy, that way people could just do a quick field order test and see where the issue might lie.
Mm.
So, one other issue that I run into that usually is easy to fix in post one way or the other is some capture cards capture 480i video as 720 by 480. And
Yep.
once again, NTSC land. Sorry, PAL users. Once if I got
Oh,
to
that's right.
just spend a year in
It's
Aussie
it's
land and just go
it's
to PAL.
oddly in PAL it's the same. It's 720 by 576. Yeah. So
Okay. And
yep.
others do 640 by 480 or 576
Yep.
then. And the ones that record in 640, everything is perfect 4:3 aspect ratio. And the ones that record in 720 stretch it. So you then have to squish it back in post in order
Yep.
to get it back to 4:3.
Yep. So
Are
it's
you
an
actually getting more horizontal data when you're recording in 720 for a
uh
situation like analog video like this?
yeah, so it definitely depends on the video, but by spec, broadcast, I believe, was 720-ish. Again, remembering like CRTs don't have a concept of horizontal resolution, right? It's a
Right.
beam traveling left to right, and occasionally the colors change. So the like a CRT itself, we talk about TV lines of resolution, but again, that's not always kind of related to the content that was coming through, and we see that a lot in video games, right? So like Super Nintendo was the classic example where it's um, the pixel aspect ratio is 8:7 and the display aspect ratio is 8:7, so you end up with like a 64:49 aspect ratio if you actually want to get like circles and not ovals. Or forgive me if those numbers aren't right, I don't know them off the top of my head, but yeah, so things aren't square pixels don't exist in that world. We see it also with one of my huge bugbears. I'm a big Capcom CPS1, CPS2 fan. Like that's my favorite era of video games. I love beat 'em ups, and whenever I see people who they're a journalist and they're like, oh hey, I've captured this great blah blah blah, and it's like, you grab that out of an emulator. I know you grab that out of an emulator because you've hit F12 and you grab square pixels and you've got this big out of aspect ratio image, and it really drives me nuts. Yes, for the short answer, me ranting off to the side here, is that, for example, DVD by spec is 720 pixels wide. So if
Mhm.
you're capturing that, definitely you'll get that extra information. I think I'd have to double check about the actual, like the resolution of what VHS type stuff could capture at.
I
But
mean, it's
like,
only 250 TVL, so there's no way that would really make a difference in quality for capture, but it
yep,
is just something that but you go up to Laserdisc or Super VHS, or you're just trying to get your best original capture.
yep,
In the Osprey properties, the horizontal format is listed as square pixels, 640 by 480, and then CCIR-601 is 720 by 480,
yep.
and then they have a 16 by 9 wide that's 852 by 480.
Yeah, so that's
So
EDTV.
right,
That's not really. It's a funny one. That one. It's not. It's kind of a
you
standard,
wouldn't
but
find that on camcorders or anything like that.
you there were for a very short amount of time. There were like progressive scan DVD players. By
Right.
spec, they all supported it, but nobody actually ever released, to my knowledge, commercial discs that were. So DVD can theoretically hold progressive scan video, but I don't think
Yeah.
anyone bothered because just that by that point DVD was everywhere. Everybody had 480i players, and so nobody bothered to push out 480p content because it wouldn't be backwards compatible, especially with older players. So DVD's kind of success was its own curse there. The other classic example of EDTV resolution is the Wii. The Wii had EDTV 480p resolution, although it was the opposite. It was 640 by 480, and when you set it to widescreen mode, it just stretched it anamorphic, so you didn't gain any quality
Right.
there. In fact, a lot of people on like nice 1080p screens would go, oh, it just looks blurry now. It's like, well, you're right, it is blurry because it's being stretched out beyond what it is. So yeah, when you're capturing, if the stuff that you're capturing had that higher resolution, absolutely capture it in anamorphic. And then the benefit there is not so much that 480p level, but then when you scale it, you've got more data to scale. So you'll end up scaling vertical more than horizontal because you'll scale up horizontal and you'll sort of stretch out the vertical to get back to your 4:3, but it will look better. It'll absolutely look better. So a bit
Hmm.
kind of like our, do we do RGB or YUV? I would say the same thing there. Like capture at the highest resolution you can. If you don't need it, who cares? If you do need it, you'll notice it, especially once you scale it. If you're scaling things to 1080p and up, you'll definitely notice that extra little bit of resolution.
That's interesting. Huh, I wouldn't have guessed that. All right, I'll set mine to CCIR right now.
So
Um,
CCIR is the standards body before. So we talk about like Rec 601 and BT 601.
mhm.
So CCIR was the group beforehand. So 601, the standard, has kind of been around a little while, and it kind of jumped across a couple of different groups. So yeah, Rec 601, as we know it today, is the standard that was CCIR one. There's two specs for 601. There's the 525 line and the 625 line. So 525 line is your NTSC, and 625 line is your PAL. Remembering again that 480i is visible. You actually had a few extra lines, top and bottom, blanking stuff and VSync and all that kind of jazz that you don't see. But the spec included it because it's for those particular specs. It's the full analog signal, everything encompassing in that, not just the bit that you see.
Interesting. One other thing I just noticed on this Osprey capture card properties thing that I guess I should have paid attention to is you could choose what line number you want to start the video at. So it's 525 line NTSC vertical format,
Mm-hmm.
480 lines of data,
Yep,
and the default starts at line 23. And if you set it back to 21, you don't get closed captions because I guess that's where that data was hidden up in
correct.
the top. So
Yep.
for home video use, what would that even matter at all?
There'll be a spec for it. I don't. If the vendor of the camera met spec, then no, it won't matter. It'll only matter if you've got like a weird spec. Again, like this, it's really nice to be able to talk about video games in this context too, because when you talk to people who only know broadcast, they're like, "Why would you even bother?" It's like, well, Sega Master System, classic. Sega Master System. Apologies, my Australianism. That's a classic example, right? These massive borders all the way around, like these huge crops. And so when we play stuff on Mister or whatever, and we apply our scalers and our cropping and all that kind of stuff, we're kind of used to that concept of there's just a ton of data that we just didn't even have and didn't care about, and it was a way to keep memory bandwidth in check because it was like, well, let's just not render a big chunk of the screen or fill it in with some full color or whatever. So it does make a difference for those sorts of things. Home video, same thing. If the camera kept up with spec, then I would leave it at all the defaults. You may have a particular camera that it was. You'd have a black line at the top, or you'd have that like pixel crawl up the top sometimes that you get with some cameras, depending on all sorts of things. Again, some of them, that's where they put closed captions. Some of them, they put all sorts of garbage up there, or undefined, so it was just static. So sometimes you want to crop that out for whatever reason, and it's just an easier way to do that at capture time that way than it is to then later on crop and scale to some weird non-integer amount.
Interesting. Well, is there anything I missed from the understanding in this context, and the
Mm,
understanding of 480i video and digitizing and archiving? Because I mean, obviously, this is a subject that just there's no solution. There's just
mm,
lots of stuff. But from the point of, hey, I have relatively important stuff I want to archive, whether it's personal for home videos or whether it's stuff where you found, anime, laser discs, VHS, whatever else.
yep.
We know Doomsday and direct RF raw capture. We know that's definitely one option, but for people that are just doing it with capture equipment,
Mm.
is there something I missed that you think is important?
I don't think so. Like across the bulk of my customers and across the different preservation groups, commercial preservation groups, and like all of the glam industries, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, they're really good. They talk openly together, and they have mailing lists, and they have get-togethers all around the world. There was a big one in Turkey a little while ago. They do great things to help each other out, because a lot of those folks are not technical per se. They are by virtue of their job, but they're more. A lot of their roles are again within museums and archives and things like that. So they're more sort of humanities focused. So it is important for them to constantly discuss this stuff in a very similar context to what we're discussing here, where it's like, how do you get between like the full propeller head version and the layman and somewhere in the middle where it's a practical real world thing. And I've seen all sorts of stuff. I've seen places that literally just, they have some 70-year-old engineer out the back who's just fixing 6-head VHSs, and they're capturing straight off the back of those via S-Video, right? And that's how they just churn out millions of hours of content all day, every day. I've seen places that use RetroTinks in commercial operation. I've seen places that do really good stuff. I've seen places that do terrible stuff, and I've seen everything in between. So, I think, it's even the pros struggle with this, I guess, I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse, but it's a thing that happens. It's definitely a challenge, I think. I'm really excited about Doomsday sort of taking off in the VHS space. But again, even then, I think it's well outside the realm of what a lot of commercial places will do, because it'll be too disk intensive, too CPU intensive, too difficult for a lot of folks who just aren't that technically capable. Again, much like what you talk about, without tools where it's just one click and I can make it easy, it's going to throw a lot of people off, because it's just too hard to try. They don't want to hire someone like me to write all these scripts. They just want to hire people to click buttons, and that's the reality of that commercial issue.
And while I make jokes about lack of GUI, and it needs one, it's more than that, though. You need to understand what the options are and why you would need to use those options.
Yep.
So a GUI would absolutely open this up to a lot more people, and a lot more people taking the time to learn what those options are, because then you don't just have to, it's twofold with command line. You have to learn how to implement each of these commands in the correct order, and you can't do some commands before other, or maybe you would, or what.
Yep.
That in itself is a big learning curve for most people, but what each option does is also confusing, and that's not their fault. That's a compliment to them, because they're giving you so many different options of ways to process this video.
Definitely. I think a bit of a side discussion, side rant, I guess. Again, me being the big open source guy, I think what a lot of people don't really consider is that, like, I get this question all the time: how can I contribute to open source? I don't write code. I think one of the big missing parts of open source contribution from the community is all the stuff that isn't code, and that's really obvious when you start to talk about missing documentation, missing like just good GUI design. Like, good GUIs are very, very difficult to write. That's why I don't write GUIs at all. They're really complicated, and they take like orders of magnitude more time sometimes than writing the code to do. Like, maths is maths, and you just bash that out and it does a thing, and great. But then trying to wrap something around that is context aware and makes sense to people without that technical background. And then even then, like training videos and things like that, right? So like, this is something I praise you for with RetroRGB and Console Mod Wiki and all that kind of stuff. Like, you've got this gamut of information that's like, it's a bit meta, but it's not, right? It's like training people in all the stuff around this stuff and what it all means and the background behind it. And a bit like this discussion, right? You've got to go and do like a year's worth of reading before you get to the point where you're like, okay, fields versus frames, and then you can start having that discussion. So I think, if anything, if I could throw a plea out to the open source community, is to try and like rally up people who understand this stuff and can write documentation and produce videos, and like the Displaced Gamers stuff and those sorts of things. Like, they are brilliant videos. There's quite a few YouTube channels out there that I constantly throw at people, where I recommend, like, before you even talk about this stuff, go look at the history of NTSC and understand how we got from complete garbage to something that's like half garbage, and that's why it is the way it is. And now you can understand how you're supposed to capture something. So I think all that
and
stuff
Chris's video is like 7 minutes long, so it's not, if you're interested in this, you have no excuse not to watch it. I'll link that too.
Yeah, definitely.
Displays 240p video.
Definitely.
So.
He's got great videos. He's like really good, excellent explanations of YPRPB, excellent explanations of why NTSC is 2997, like all that kind of stuff. There's really good, and it's the kind of thing where people, they kind of get upset about it, and it's like, no, if you understand the why, and yes, you've got to spend minutes of your life understanding this nerd thing that's really useless other than a bit of trivia, but then it kind of subsides that anger of like, why doesn't it? And you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is a thing, it exists, and I have to work around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is a perfect place to end this one because we've covered it all. We've ended with we need everybody's help
That's
making better
it.
GUIs and
Please
interfaces for this stuff.
contribute.
Yeah. And thank you as always, man. You're just an awesome help for all of this. I really appreciate all the time you put into helping people and I mean, helping shape retro RGB to where it is. So it's thank you very much for all of this stuff. And hopefully another couple months or a year will go by and we'll have another one of these discussions from whatever other insane thing I've rabbit hole I've gone down this
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Yeah, I look forward to it. It's always fun. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.